there's been a clear shift, right, from a very inflexible, structured workforce where everything was very top down. And so we've evolved from that world over the past 10 to 15 years, I would say, V2 of the workforce, if you will. I'm really interested in thinking through, okay, how do we learn about what those models, what type of gaps have they perhaps created that we are now at a very unique point in time post-COVID to address, right? What's the V3 of the workforce? How do we make sure that we complete that transition away from a very, very structured workforce?
Welcome to Authentic Energy, a podcast dedicated to getting to the bottom of what it means to be your true, authentic self at work. I am your host, Wendy Brand, a former corporate executive turned transformation coach. Let's take this learning journey together as I meet with guests weekly to learn how they've managed, or not managed, to find the elusive boundaries and success in their career and what it really means to find balance. Hi, thank you for joining us again this week. I hope that this content continues to be useful for you as we explore how individuals take responsibility for how they show up in the world and in the workplace, and how organizations have an important role to play in creating an environment where we can thrive. Today's episode is another episode from our culture series and a really special conversation focused on the organization. But before I introduce you to our guest and we dive into areas of opportunities for the organizations, I want to remind you that I have several opportunities for individuals looking to focus on things that you can do to take care of yourself and potentially prevent burnout or start to recover if you are already experiencing it. We have 2-day workshops in New Braunfels, Texas. We have an amazing, luxurious 3-day retreat at the Savannah Resort and Spa in Carefree, Arizona, and a 6-week online group program, all with the same goal to unleash your authentic energy. 3 different ways to experience the program, but all geared toward the same outcome. So if you're interested or know someone that may benefit, please visit my website at wendybrandcoaching.com/retreat. But now, I am excited to share this special conversation with you. French native Virginie Raphael is the founder and managing partner of Full Circle, a New York-based pre-seed fund investing in a more equitable and sustainable workforce where fulfilled individuals regain pride and agency over their work. When I came across her profile, I was so inspired by the work she is doing, how she is helping to shape our workplace by directing pre-seed funding to startup organizations, primarily focused on getting people into jobs that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to get into or wouldn't have even known about, and helping to prevent people from falling out of jobs because they don't have access to financial security or ample health care or childcare. Really on the cutting edge and at the ground floor of discovering the changes necessary for the workplace of the future. Prior to founding Full Circle, Virginie was a managing director at Tusk Ventures, where she was an early employee and spent a decade advising and investing in early-stage founders operating in highly regulated industries: early Uber, Lemonade, Bird, Row, and FanDuel. I hope you enjoy this insightful conversation as we explore things that I believe will inspire our workplace of the future. Virginie, welcome to the Authentic Energy podcast. I am so excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Wendy. I'm excited for the conversation.
Of course, me too. So I am so intrigued by the work you are doing. Tell us a little bit about your career path and what you're doing today.
So very, very non-linear. So I'm from France originally. Thought I wanted to be a diplomat. So I was a really long way off from what I'm doing today, although I'm bringing all the pieces together slowly but surely. Impact was always really important to me. And my younger, perhaps naive self thought, well, what better place to make an impact and change the lives of millions of people than in government? Surely that has to be the way to start. And then I spent a little bit of time in government and figured out that it was not going to be my pace. And so I did a 180. I started my career at Lehman Brothers the summer of 2007, which was a really interesting time to start a career in banking, let alone Lehman. I was in public finance, which if you're not familiar with that, it's helping state and local government via municipal finance to pay for schools and parks and improvements to road. And so in my mind anyway, the impact piece was there because I was surely helping a lot of people by doing that. The bank didn't care nearly as much as I did, of course, so that ran its course. I did 5 years in banking and then was recruited out by someone who was starting a small consulting firm in New York City. I was attracted to the concept. It was supposed to be regulatory and political consulting. I wasn't really sure what that meant, to be honest, but it was 4 or 5 brilliant people with a vision that I liked, and so I joined them. We got lucky and got connected to Uber really, really early on, back when Travis was figuring out how to get into New York City and make ride-sharing legal across the country. That was 2011 or so. And for better alignment, he asked us to take equity for a portion of our monthly retainer. It was Series A Uber, and obviously that worked out fairly well, and launched the firm on a different journey all the way to a venture capital fund. So that's how I got into venture and what I'm doing today. Today I have my own fund. It's called Full Circle. I named it Full Circle because I felt like I was finally at the point in my career where I could put all the pieces together. That public policy angle, that consulting work that I had done, lots of work working with founders as early as possible. And so finally, I thought I had arrived in my point in my career where I'm putting it all full circle. So it's a pre-seed fund, $10 million fund that I run as a solo GP out of New York City. And the goal, quite simply, but very, very hard, is to invest in a more sustainable, equitable workforce, which to me means 2 things at a high level. One is getting people into jobs that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. Talent is widely distributed, but opportunity certainly isn't. And the second thing is, how do we prevent people from falling out of jobs that they love, but they don't have the healthcare infrastructure in place, or the elderly or childcare that they need, or the financial security they need to continue in that job. So they end up quitting. That's really what was the impetus behind launching the fund. I was in the middle of the pandemic in 2020 and constantly hearing that stat about women leaving the workforce because they didn't have the proper childcare. And I thought, surely in 2023 in the United States of America, we have to do better than this. Mm-hmm. So I quit the consulting and venture fund that I was at and launched Full Circle. That's how we got here.
Amazing. I love that story. I love the name of the fund. And I think what drew me to you, I was doing some research looking for podcast guests, and what you are doing right now really resonated with me because, as I've shared before on the podcast, I left my corporate job, and my mission now really is to help others not have to do what I have done. I want people to be able to stay in their career, stay in the corporate world, if that's what they want, right? Mm-hmm. If that's not what they want, then absolutely. I hope that I'm going to be living proof of what you can achieve outside of the corporate world as well. But I do believe that we can stay in the corporate world, and that there is a role of that the individual needs to play in taking care of themselves and setting boundaries, et cetera. But there is a role of the organization that they play in how we're structured and how we distribute workload, how we create a more equitable workplace for all. And so love what you're doing. I'm really curious what do you look for? Like, what type of criteria do you look for in organizations that you may potentially fund? That's kind of that sign of, okay, yeah, they are really trying to be equitable.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things. One is I'm very outcome driven, right? So I invest very, very early on. Pre-seed is typically the first round of financing in the company. And for me, they really need to have an impact on the structural composition of the workforce, right? So there are plenty of companies who are working more so on software to make teams more efficient, whether they're hybrid or remote or fully distributed across the globe, that type of thing. It's less interesting to me, even though it's important. But to me, it's really about, did we get someone into a job that they otherwise would not have known even existed, right? Or did we prevent someone from creating a labor shortage? Because there's a tremendous labor shortage in teachers, nurses, right? Mm-hmm. How are we going to fix those issues? Because AI there is not the answer for sure.
Right.
So clearly there has to be a better support system for the individuals to have better integration between life and work, right? So if that if the company that I'm looking at can't create that outcome, then that is by definition investable. I mean, that's the first thing. The second thing, which is circling back to what you were mentioning about the individual level, right? So if you go back to my background at the public policy side, there's been a clear shift, right, from a very inflexible, structured workforce where everything was very top down. The employer provided your pension, your health benefits. And so we've evolved from that world over the past 10 to 15 years, I would say. Freelancing became a thing. The gig economy, right? I spent a lot of time there working with Uber on the 1099 versus W-2, portable benefits, like those type of issues. Fascinating, right? So V2 of the workforce, if you will. I'm really interested in thinking through, okay, how do we learn about what those models, what type of gaps have they perhaps created that we are now at a very unique point in time post-COVID to address, right? What's the V3 of the workforce? How do we make sure that we complete that transition away from a very, very structured workforce? And yes, we've transitioned to a little bit more fluidity, right? A little bit more acceptance toward freelancing and how we can make those careers work. But for the most part, there are very few people who can make that a true career, right, and make a living out of that. Well, how do we change that? What's the next version of that? So I think a lot about business models for that reason. The care side of things, for example, there's a lot of possibilities, and yet, you can't really have a caregiver that is on a 1099 model because that limits what you can do in terms of training them and making sure that the level of care that they provide is up to very high standards. And so what if we move away from this W-2 1099 debate, right, and find another way of doing this? So that the business model is new and interesting and can actually address the issues that we need to address. So those are the two things mostly.
Wonderful. And what are you seeing? Are you seeing organizations that have that intention?
Yes, for sure. There's a lot of great companies. A few spaces that I'm keeping an eye on. One is about helping kids as early as possible identify their skill set, what they like to do, what they're good at, why, what would be a good job for them and a good career to pursue, and how do they get there, right? There's a lot in terms of the past few years when the market was so hot and there was so much talent and so many jobs that it was all about kind of volume and building pipelines and just finding heads, right? Now that the market is turning a little bit, I think there's a good, unique opportunity to refocus on, okay, well, how do we make sure that we don't just build volume and pipeline, hiring pipelines? How do we actually build it in a bit of a higher quality fashion, right? Where we help kids in as early as high school figure out what the right path for them is. And no, the answer is not necessarily everyone goes to 4-year college, get into massive student debt, get into a job that they don't necessarily like, just to pay down those loans. And then 10 years later, they're still into a job that they hate. How do we do better than that? A lot around kind of that skills, job candidate fit. How do we hire based on skills and not just where people went to college or what their LinkedIn says,
Yes.
Which is not very much. So I love that space. I think that's a really interesting, exciting space for you.
Yes, I that is very exciting to me as well. I think it's so important to, number one, understand what your values are and what's important to you, because that, if you can align that with your skills, then you might have a better chance of doing something that you actually enjoy waking up and doing every morning. And I think kids, especially, we may miss that part.
No, that's true. I mean, there's a giving those children the opportunity to do an internship, right? Or a part-time job, or I think it's two things. I think it's about capturing lived experiences as you go, because I think those tell you a heck of a lot more than you sitting down in front of LinkedIn and trying to self-report out what you think you're good at. That's really hard to do, right? But I think if you grasp on And like my son was super excited. He was given a reading to do at church yesterday. And he was like zero nervous. The kid was zero nervous. He was just excited. He got up in the
Yeah.
morning. He's like, I'm going to take my shower, brush my hair, do my suit. I'm like, great, awesome. Like, and I don't know what that translates into necessarily, right? But like if I could put that somewhere, and over time kind of track what are the trends, like what does this kid like to do, like I mean it
Yes.
seems like public speaking is kind of energizing to him at this time, right? And I don't need to determine at every single turn kind of what does that tell me about what he's going to become. That's not the point. But I think if we get better at capturing over time, it's really hard to remember how you feel about something when like 5, 10, 15 years have passed, right? And things can evolve. But I think if you get better at capturing what you feel when you do something, this lived experience, right? I love this concept. It's a heck of a lot more indicative than he went to school and his major was accounting. It's like, great. What am I going to do with that? So that, you know, that's one. And I think giving them the chance to actually experience via an internship, via a job, different type of things, right?
Yes, I agree. So are you working with schools? Are you working with organizations to start to look at assessing skills earlier?
So not with schools necessarily. I think there's a lot that we can do algorithmically, right, to kind of draw trends. And I just invested in a company called Path Match, for example, that they don't sell to schools. It's free for students. There's some partnership opportunities with schools and universities for sure, because career services are so strained, right? And the ratio is like 1 to close to 1,000 students or something. But so what they do is they sell to companies who are interested in, right? Companies have zero interest in getting candidates that don't match their criteria, or that will be so ill-fitted that they will leave within 6 months. Like this, they lose a lot of money. And so there's a lot of interest on the company side. So it's a pretty typical B2B model to sell to companies to help them establish a pipeline of candidates that are already sort of pre-selected because they self-select for that. And then over time, you help them build a little bit of a profile, increase their hireability score if they're not quite a great match. Like, well, help them understand what gaps they have and how they can fill those gaps. And then offer courses, internships, opportunities to fill those gaps. And then when they're ready, they can apply at the company and start following those companies a lot earlier. And the companies get an indication of who's following me, who's interested in that role and why. And are they qualified? And if not, when will they be and how? So that's a really great example of how we can do that without really selling to schools is a very difficult thing to do.
I can imagine.
There's clearly more budget on the corporate side of things, but that's just one example. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And another space that I'm passionate about is the freelancing side, or I don't love the word, but traditionally what's known as freelancing. I think there what we've seen is there's a lot of really, really, really talented people who need to, at first anyway, have a kind of traditional regular job, I don't know what we want to call it, while they start because they're really talented at, I don't know, web design or some other thing that they do on the side of their desk. And they would only dream of being able to do it 100% of the time, except, you become a freelancer, you don't have healthcare. And that's very challenging and not possible in this country. How do we change that? How do we find platforms? I'm an investor in Wethos very proudly. How do we find platforms that enable you to really flip the model away from freelancers compete? You bring them work and clients, but really then the platform becomes about those clients finding talent at the cheapest possible cost. And then the freelancers end up competing with each other. It's a race to the bottom when it comes to pricing. And you can't really have a 6-figure salary as a freelancer. You need to do something else, right? Wethos flips that model. And really, to me, is that evolution to the V3.0, right, of the workforce and what freelancing could be by enabling those freelancers to team up. No overhead, right? No creation of an agency, anything of that sort. Simply teaming up around a project. You help them scope a larger project. You have a full library of templates that you can use, which also offer pricing transparency. So you don't compete on price, right? All you're trying to do is team up, deliver larger scopes, and then you can make more money together, right? And there's a whole fintech play behind that, of course, where you handle payments and you take a cut of those payments. So really brilliant model. Rachel's an amazing co-founder of the company with Claire. And to me, that really represents a massive, massive opportunity to truly move the needle forward and just say, freelancing was great, but it served its purpose. What's the next version of that? And I'm really excited about enabling people who either don't want to just be one thing or continue to evolve in a corporate environment necessarily, as you said before, right? It's whatever mode of work is best suited for the worker should just be possible. It shouldn't be limited, certainly, by availability of healthcare or financial security, right? We should address all of that so that, sure, if someone wants to continue evolving in the corporate environment, fantastic. If someone wants to have 5 jobs at once, great. If someone is going to hop and have a job for no longer than 18 months, like indications are that the younger generation is going to be more in that category. Great, let them have 18 jobs over the course of 10 years. Like, that's fantastic if that's what they want to do, right? This concept of portfolio careers. I'm all for just letting people truly fulfill their potential to the max. And while we're at it, I really believe, right, create a much more prosperous workforce across the board. We'll all be better off.
I agree. And I think part of it, something that just occurred to me is the learning, right? Just like we, kids were learning, the education system is a bit, the model is broken and kids learn differently. Adults also learn differently. And I think for me in the corporate world, what kept me going and staying alive there is when I was in organizations that provided me opportunities to keep learning and growing. And what's the next role? And now go over here and work on that. I just learned so much. But the organizations that felt restrictive, like, I need you to do this and don't ask any questions. We don't want to hear your idea. It wasn't a two-way street. It was very kind of top down. That model just, I think that's broken in the corporate world. Yeah. And even I wonder if, Workplace 3.0 or V3 is, maybe a hybrid too, of allowing people, what does it look like to allow someone to have another, to have some gigs on the side and be in a corporate role. When my last role was, I led the learning and development team at a retail chain, and I oversaw the instructional design team. Well, those individuals, I probably had some people on my team that were secretly working other jobs because they could do it any time of day. And, so, there's some restructuring that would need to happen in an organization to allow for that, because you do feel like you're paying for X amount of hours. And, is that amount of hours being split with another company or job, or, but
which in and of itself is so flawed, by the way.
Right.
We, so I was, we were still running the advisory side of the shop, the VC fund that I was at before during the pandemic. And when COVID hit, I remember there was this freak out moment of, how are we going to measure productivity now that people are working from home? Like, how are we going to make sure that they still do the same amount of work? Well, my answer to that was, how did we used to? The only way you measure productivity in a service industry, financial services or consulting, is, are your clients still happy and continuing to pay the monthly retainer? That's all you have. And whether it takes your workers 6 hours to deliver that, or 8 or 12, is completely irrelevant, right? So if someone who's very good at time optimization does it in 6 and want to be an actress with the remaining 6, fantastic, right? For the record, I hired my deal counsel, and she's both an actress and a brilliant lawyer, formerly at Gunderson, which, doesn't get better than that. She just didn't want to do it full time.
Yeah. So any other investments that you're making, or organizations you're seeing kind of on the cutting edge and things that they're doing that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think there's still unfortunately, a lot of room for improvement on the maternal health outcomes
Mhm.
side of things. The US continues to be embarrassingly low on every single possible
Mhm.
ranking, and whichever way you look at it, it's really, really bad. There are some companies that are starting to come out with some really innovative models to address that. So one of them is Zaya Care, an proud early investor in Zaya. It's led by a woman who's originally from Switzerland, actually, so has deep experience with the European care delivery model, which I do as well, being French. So we clicked immediately. And what she's trying to build is a model whereby the the practitioners in those space, so we're talking wraparound maternity care, right? Lactation consultants, dietitians, um, they're typically solo practitioners, highly fragmented. It enables the insurance companies to say, you know what, I just don't want to deal with all those providers. Um, so what happens is most people who use those providers end up paying out of pocket, right? And those providers are not particularly incentivized to find people who can't afford their services on a
Mhm.
self-pay model. It's a much smaller pool of patients, and by the way, you don't end up helping the people who need it the most. So what Zaya does is she goes to payers, and they say, okay, don't worry about the fact that those providers are highly fragmented. We will be the provider of record for you, right? You only need to deal with Zaya. I will go find those providers. I will get them on my platform and make it really, really easy via technology to process claims. I will take a cut. The business model is really interesting. The Zaya takes a cut directly out of the claim reimbursement. Now, all of a sudden, you do a few things, right? From my perspective, in terms of that structural change to the workforce.
Mhm.
One is you bring new providers to market because now they have a much larger pool of patients that they can offer their services to, right? Because they take insurance, all of a sudden the number of people who can avail themselves of those services is much greater, right? So that's one. And then two, you prevent women from dropping off the workforce because they received really poor pre or postnatal care. That's crazy. That should never be a reason why uh, a woman has to go to work or resume their career a little bit later than they otherwise would because they haven't received the proper care. Um, and so those two clearly outcome driven goals that Zaya had was really compelling to me. In addition to the business model that was pretty unique um, and unlike anything that I had seen before. So that's another space that is
Interesting.
ripe for disruption
Yes,
for sure.
absolutely. And kind of fits into the well-being. I'm seeing more kind of well-being models being stood up, having a well-being officer in the organization focused on, not just the usual benefits, but they bring in someone to do yoga. Is there meditation? Is there like other modalities, bringing that into the workforce? There's a little more of that coming into the corporate world, which I think could be, if that's where we spend all of our time, having that as part of the benefits could be helpful as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's still a lot of, and the current tougher environment will make it really interesting. Um, there's clearly been a bit of fatigue around benefits and
Yes.
point solutions, and like that. I'm not seeing a lot of eagerness from investors to invest in things like that. I think the reasons why are sound, right? Which is the past few years were great. Companies were able to add any sort of like perks to benefit to their cost
Yeah.
basis. Works a little bit less well in the current environment, of course. And fundamentally, we still haven't addressed the issues that most people have, right? There was a time where sort of offering egg freezing was like the new thing and the hot thing to do, and everybody was offering that. But the reality is that amongst the employer base, often companies just don't have the data and the information necessary to set up a benefits package that makes sense, right? A cost effective, wide ranging benefit package. I'm encouraged to see that change because
Yeah.
I think that's one thing if companies are willing to pay to support their workers, uh, but it's really wasted if on top of that nobody uses it. Like the engagement rate
Right.
of most benefits, right, are just so low that at some point you have to ask yourself the questions: what will drive engagement here, right? Is there a different model entirely that maybe doesn't come from the employer, right? There are some things that should fundamentally, I think, potentially be paid for by the employer,
Yeah.
but offered outside of the corporate environment.
Yeah.
I think coaching comes to mind in that
Yeah.
respect. It's a very different dynamic, right? If you know your coach is paid for and provided by your employer, are you going to be as, upfront with that
Right.
coach? Are you going to be as transparent? Are you going to wonder that they're going to report out some things on you? It gets interesting. That relationship, I
Yes.
think, is changing as to what people expect the employer to do and how, most importantly. And so
Yeah.
that's another thing that I'm keeping an eye on, how our benefits package is going to evolve. And is there a different play here than just, bigger and bigger packages that still
Right.
don't address the needs that workers
Right.
have? So that's another thing I'm following.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, do you mind if we shift to a couple personal questions that I
No,
ask
that's
my
fine.
guests?
No, that's fine.
Fantastic. Okay. So we'll start with if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, like your 5 or 6 year old self, what would you tell her?
I would say um, the worst they can say is no. Um, and this is a more recent development for me, so this is kind of interesting. But more and more, as I progress in my career and get older, I'm less and less afraid of asking, because
Mm.
I've found time and again that, especially going through a fundraising process for a fund is brutal. But you meet wonderful people who might tell you no, but I've learned to take it as a no, not now, right? Or it's not pleasant to get a no. I'd rather get a yes. That's for sure. Everybody does, right? In
Yeah.
any context. But it's not nearly as bad as you think, right? So that's the first thing. I think I would, when in doubt, just ask. Ask
Yes.
politely, make your case. They say no, they say no, right? What's the big deal? It's probably the first thing. And I think I would also encourage my younger self to just be more direct and transparent. And there's nothing to be gained from sort of trying to fit a box or fit a persona that you think other people expect of you. People don't fundamentally care that much, I think, who don't remember. It's never as bad as you think, I think, is what I'm
Yes.
trying to say. That's the other thing I would tell my younger self is you perceive it to be, this terrible performance that you just gave, and but in reality, people just kind of move on. They look at their own self and they don't care that much about. So do you. Like, I've
Right.
learned early on that organizations don't care when it comes down to it, right? Like, nobody cares as much about you than you. And I think that's a really freeing, powerful realization of got to do what's best for you, because at the end of the day, there's no one else who cares as deeply about becoming who you want to be than you. So um,
I love
double,
that.
double down on that.
Yes. I'm learning the same thing. I think I would probably, if I could go back and tell my younger self, I would also say, stop worrying what other people think,
Yeah.
just do you. I love that.
Yep.
Um, and my last question is really around travel. So I love to travel, and I love that you're originally from France, and which I've only been to Paris, and only briefly on a work trip,
Mm-hmm.
but I know there's so much more to see there. But
Yes.
if you could name your most favorite place you've traveled, and then what's on your bucket list, what would that be?
Um, Definitely Costa Rica. I
Mm,
love Costa Rica. I've not even been that many times, but many time I go, this is just my happy place.
yes.
And if you haven't been, you must check out Nosara. Uh, Anywhere absolutely fantastic, or anywhere really that you go to in Costa Rica is like at least a 3 hour, very bad road,
Yeah.
type of thing from the airport. And so when you get there, hey, it's beautiful, it's amazing. There's not that many people, and the locals are just fantastic, fantastic people. I love spending time in Costa Rica. Um, I think bucket list. I mean, man, there's so many destinations. If we take it outside the travel route, but somewhat related though, um, I want to learn how to fly a plane. That's on my bucket list.
Ooh.
There's something just, hey, I love learning a new skill in a way that's challenging, by something that's like tiny bit edgy, tiny bit scary, uh, risk adjusted.
Yeah.
That's what I do. And And if I could learn how to fly a plane, I think that'd be super great. So that's on the bucket list for sure. Life is too short. We have to make the most of it always.
Well, Virginie, this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope that we'll stay in touch because this 3.0, Workplace 3.0 is definitely something I'm passionate about, and you are as well. So thank you so much for joining me in the conversation. I really, really appreciate it.
I'd love to stay in touch. Absolutely. It was fun. And thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yes, thank you.
What a great conversation. Okay, here are my takeaways. Number 1, the Full Circle Fund is a $10 million pre-seed fund with a goal to invest in a more sustainable, equitable workforce, getting people into jobs that they would normally get into and preventing people from falling out of jobs that they love due to financial security, healthcare, or childcare. Companies need to have an impact on the structural composition of the workforce to be funded. Number 2, there has been a shift in the workforce in the past 10 to 15 years from the top down into the V2 of the workforce that includes the gig economy. But V3 workforce is about addressing what type of gaps those recent changes have created. Number 3, there is an opportunity in helping kids as early as possible identify their skill set and how they get to where they want to be. For example, helping kids as early as high school figure out their skills and helping those hiring look more at skills and not just where people went to college. Number 4, capturing lived experiences as you go and getting better at capturing what you feel when you do something is more indicative than sharing where you went to college. Number 5, how do we fund platforms to flip the model of freelancers competing against each other with a race to the bottom when it comes to price? Wethos allows freelancers to team up around a project without competing on price. Number 6, whatever mode of work that works best for that person should be available to them. Let's allow people to truly fulfill their potential to the max and in the process create a more prosperous workforce in the future. Number 7, Zaya Care is bringing new providers to the market because the patients are pooled together and can take insurance and prevent women from dropping out of the workforce because of poor pre- or postnatal care. Number 8, we still do not have the data to show what benefits packages will most benefit our employees. Thank you again for listening. Visit my website for more information on our authentic energy programs at wendybrandcoaching.com/retreat. And tune in next week for another Culture Series episode. Thank you.